Hello ladies and gentlemen, this video was inspired by Ashley from Climb the Stacks and Steven from Steve Reads Books. A couple of weeks ago, Ashley made an excellent video sharing her reading history and expressed interest in hearing others. Hopefully that this becomes something that many people do, because I think it's really interesting to see the people who have kind of made reading an active part of their lives enough that they talk about it on the internet, to see where they came from and to see the variety of different reading lives that there can be. So let's get started. My reading life started back when I was 2 or 3 years old. Our nightly routine was for my father to read to me every night before bed. By the time I was 3 or 4 years old, I thought that reading was like the coolest thing ever, and in order to impress my parents, this was something that I had to figure out how to do. I didn't really grasp exactly how reading worked, so I would have my dad read to me and I would watch him read pages to me and I would memorize pages. So one day I decided that I was going to memorize at least one page, and then at night I was going to impress him with the fact that I could read this page. But naturally my tiny little brain couldn't hold on to that, even that page worth of words, and I kind of felt silly whenever I went to read and I couldn't remember anything. Of course my dad didn't make a big deal of it, but from then on I was determined to figure out how it worked. And the first book that I totally figured out how to read on my own was The Foot Book by Dr. Seuss. I wish that this was the copy that I read, but this is the copy that my library currently has. I remember being so proud of myself because the only word that initially gave me trouble was the word right, R-I-G-H-T, and once I figured that out, it helped me figure out other little words that have that tricky I-G-H-T ending. And I was so impressed with myself. And that was when I was 4 years old. And reading started off as a thing that I did to impress people who were older than me or people that were my same age. I cultivated my ability to read so that I was cool, because in my mind it was such an active part of my day. It was such a big part of my day waiting for my dad to read to me at night, that in my mind it was the coolest thing I could do. So this was something that I needed to grow so that I can impress other adults. And that kind of continued into kindergarten. I usually, even in grade school, tested at the highest reading level or above average reading level. And in the first grade, I even went back to kindergarten classes and read, which is baffling to me now to consider that I was extroverted or at least outgoing enough to do that. But it was still look what I can do. That carried on up until 2nd or 3rd grade, where I was at the age of 8, and I read a lot, but it was because a program known as Accelerated Reader was introduced, where basically books were assigned a reading level and a certain amount of points. You would read the book and you would take a little quiz, and based on your score you got points, and it became not only a way to impress people, but it became a competition. So it kind of got better around grade 3 because I was introduced to books that I actually enjoyed, that I wanted to read. I wasn't just doing it because it made me look cool, but I had a good teacher who introduced me to one of my first favorite authors, which was Louis Sachar, and some of his sideways stories. I don't remember if this was the exact one that made me fall in love, but I ended up loving all of his children's books. I also think I discovered Roald Dahl around that time as well, but that competition and desire to impress people with my ability to read didn't really completely go away throughout grade school. Going into middle school, it didn't change too much, but I was starting to be allowed to be at the library by myself, or at least not vigilantly supervised, so I could kind of explore the books that I wanted to read outside of the children's section. So that let me look in the newly growing teen fiction section and the best-selling adult section. So I started exploring other options of reading, and I think that that's when it kind of started to grow. There was still that little bit of competitiveness, and I really enjoyed being defined as someone who liked to read, because that's just a part of who I was and kind of am. I like having a thing that's my own, and books were my thing. But I started exploring different parts of the library at that time, and I started deciding what I wanted to read based on what I kind of wanted to know. I wasn't reading nonfiction, but I was reading like dark, gritty, contemporary teen fiction with like drug usage and sex and things that I would never experience on my own, because I was too scared of getting in trouble to ever experience those things on my own. But I also started exploring things like Nicholas Sparks to experience these romantic tales that I was so curious about as a preteen and teenager. Looking back, my parents weren't super active in knowing about what I was reading, because looking back, they probably wouldn't have approved considering their conservative Christian background. I think I turned out just fine, and I didn't ever act on or romanticize these things that were happening in the books. But I continued to be someone who was known as a reader, and I always was just interested in knowing about books, even if I wasn't reading them actively. Our teen section at our school library had started to grow, and anytime we'd get a new book, I didn't have the time to read them all naturally, but I would read the backs and start recommending them to people. For example, one big one was The Perks of Being a Wallflower. When our library got it, I read the back and I was like, this sounds amazing, but I never got around to reading it. But I had recommended it to half a dozen people, and they came back and were like, this is the best book ever, thank you so much for recommending it. And I'm like, oh yeah, I haven't read that book. I'm like, what? So I've just always been someone who enjoys books. When I got into high school, I started pursuing the creative arts, and I've never been one for balance, so I didn't read that much in high school outside of what I was supposed to read, and I didn't even read a lot of that, but I was still defined as a bookish person, and I felt kind of like Ashley did. She mentioned in her undergrad or grad school she wasn't reading as much, but she was still considered a reader, and I kind of felt like a fraud because I really wasn't reading it, because that carried over also into college. Because I was a studio art major, I was constantly working in the studio. I didn't really have a whole lot of time to read, or I didn't make enough time to read. So I would read a few books a year probably, and I didn't really start reading again actively. I mean, I read here and there and people would recommend something, like John Green was recommended to me whenever I was in undergraduate school. But I didn't consider myself a reader. I loved books, and I still felt this joy when I got the opportunity to go to the library or go to a bookstore, but I didn't consider myself a reader. And that all kind of changed whenever I discovered Tumblr and YouTube and really delved into the online communities that existed at the time. Because when I graduated from college, I got a job related to my degree, but then I got fired. And I took that as a really low blow to my self-esteem, so I just dived headfirst into the internet. But it was either Stacy from, I think, prettybooks.tumblr.com or Emma from nosinabook@tumblr.com. I don't really follow Tumblr as much as I used to, but I saw that they were doing a 100-book challenge, and I was like, you know what? It was the end of 2010. I had lost my job, and I knew I was going to need something to preoccupy my time and distract me from the fact that I felt like a total failure. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to do this. And I did. I made it a goal to read 100 books in 2011, and somewhere in there I discovered Goodreads and realized that it was a really easy way to keep track of my 100-book challenge. Everything kind of changed from there. I made reading an active part of my life, and I was starting to watch booktube videos. I was looking at a lot of bookish Tumblr blogs, and in 2012, I was still kind of down about the fact that I didn't have a job in my art field, but I had recently gotten a job at a library, and all of that combined with the fact that all of my friends from undergraduate had moved away, I was still in the same town, I decided to start a booktube channel. And I have pretty much made reading a priority ever since, and that was in 2012, and it's coming up on my 2-year anniversary. I don't think that my reading story is anything incredibly unique, but the thing that I was so proud to realize when I started thinking about my story was how my motives for reading changed, how it started off as a way to pretty much be a little show-off to where I am now. It may seem like I'm still being a show-off because I talk on the internet about books, but as I got older, I realized that reading was something I should do for myself and not for anyone else, and I think that that's really when I started to enjoy reading. I always read, books were always present, and I always loved them, but the love became more pure, I guess, as I got older and decided to read for me. It's also really cool to think about the fact that if it wasn't for my dad, who isn't really a reader himself, reading to me every night, I probably wouldn't be where I am today, so thanks, Dad. And that is pretty much my reading history. It will continue to grow from here. It's very interesting to see how my taste has changed from like Nicholas Sparks and like dark, gritty YA to what it is now. That's all that I have for today. Thank you so much for watching, and please, please, please feel free to share your reading history in the comments below or make a video response and let me or Ashley know about it. I would love to hear about it. Thank you all so much for watching, and I hope to see you soon with a new video.